Hello historians and welcome back. Today we will be looking at the early life of good Queen Bess, also known as Queen Elizabeth I. Elizabeth was born on the 7th of September 1533 at Greenwich Palace to King Henry VIII and his second wife and queen, Queen Anne Boleyn. The Princess Elizabeth was the couple's first and only surviving child, although at this point Henry had two illegitimate children, the Lady Mary and Henry Fitzroy, Duke of Richmond and Somerset. Unlike when her sister was born, Elizabeth's arrival was a disappointment for both of her parents. The celebrations at court were muted, very cold and disagreeable, and there had been no thought of having the bonfires and rejoicings usual in such cases, according to the imperial ambassador Eustace Chapuis. Henry's enemies believed that the birth of a daughter was divine punishment for the king's controversial divorce from his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. The birth of the Princess Elizabeth meant that the Princess Mary was now illegitimate and was now to be referred to as the Lady Mary. Elizabeth was christened 3 days later on the 10th. Elizabeth was Henry's heir, but she was not a welcomed one. The Dowager Duchess of Norfolk helped carry the canopy of estate, and Elizabeth was wrapped in a mantle of purple velvet with a long train. Mary Howard carried a chrisom of pearl and stone to put on the child at baptism. Anne quickly conceived a deep and protective love for her child, as any mother would do, and to begin with, hated to let her out of her sight. By her throne under the canopy of estate lay her baby on a velvet cushion. Anne feared that Mary posed a threat to Elizabeth's position. Henry soothed Anne's fears by separating Mary from many of her servants and eventually disbanded her household. In the December, plague had hit London, so Henry sent Mary and Elizabeth to Hatfield House, where the country air was better for the baby and would become a favourite home for the young princess. Mary was to be a maid of honour for her half-sister, against her wishes. Anne often visited her daughter at Eltham or Hatfield, and Henry was also proud of his red-haired daughter and liked showing her off to visiting ambassadors. Anne was delighted in July 1535 as King Francis at last agreed to enter negotiations for the marriage of Elizabeth to his third son. However, to many, Mary was still seen as next in line, as not everyone recognised the new marriage, despite being declared illegitimate and Elizabeth named as heir. November 1535, Anne found out she was pregnant again. Anne had suffered miscarriages since Elizabeth, and she had suffered from depression during the first few months as she knew her future was riding on this baby, as Henry was becoming less tolerable of his strong-headed wife, and Henry's pursuit of Jane Seymour was
pretty obvious.
Anne repeatedly pressed Henry to execute Catherine and Lady Mary out of fear for herself, Elizabeth, and the unborn child, but Henry would not succumb to Anne's demands. Catherine of Aragon fell dangerously ill. The ironic thing is, despite Anne believing that Catherine was her downfall, Catherine was Anne's safety net. As long as Catherine was around, Anne was safe. Henry would not harm her, as it would prove he was wrong. Catherine of Aragon died on the 7th of January 1536, the same day that Elizabeth's mother, Anne, would miscarry her saviour, as she saw Jane Seymour sat on the king's knee. 2 days later, on the 9th, the king and queen held a court ball to celebrate the threat of war dying with Catherine. The royal couple wore yellow, the royal colour of mourning in Spain, out of a sign of respect, although it has been argued that this was actually a snub to Catherine, as it was a party and it involved dancing and everyone was enjoying life in bright colours rather than being sombre and wearing black, the English colour of mourning. The Princess Elizabeth was paraded around the room in the arms of her father, who took great pleasure in showing off his child. Anne Boleyn spent the early months of 1536 at Greenwich. She rarely saw the king now, and spent her days doing charity work, playing with her dogs, and ordering new clothes. Her accounts show that she kept Elizabeth dressed majestically. The month of May would be the downfall of Anne Boleyn, and feeling that something was amiss, Anne charged her chaplain, Matthew Parker, with the care of Elizabeth on the 26th of April, 1536. Anne was right to do so, as she was executed on the 19th of May, 1536, along with her uncle George on the 17th. Elizabeth's position and safety at court was never certain after Anne's execution. She was demoted from princess to lady, and she wasn't protected, as she was not the heir to the throne, like her brother Edward, nor did she have a powerful family member to protect her, like her half-sister Mary. Elizabeth had to learn to be silent and invisible from a young age, if she planned on surviving. On the next day, the 20th of May, Henry wore white, the royal colour of mourning in France, as this is where Anne pretty much grew up. This to me is also evidence that when they wore yellow for Catherine, it wasn't actually a snub. Henry gave orders for Elizabeth to be taken from Greenwich to Hatfield in the care of Lady Margaret Bryan and kept out of his sight. Elizabeth, like her sister Mary, was deemed illegitimate and was now to use the title the Lady Elizabeth, like her sister, and was not to refer to herself as a princess. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. If you would like to watch another video, may I suggest my video on Elizabeth's parents, King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, or what about her predecessor to the throne, Queen Mary I? Next time we will be exploring Elizabeth's life as the Lady Elizabeth. But until then, have a wonderful day.